Premed Office Hours, episode 171. Let me turn on the right microphone so I sound better. That's much better. Hello, my name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your moderator for today. Thank you all for being here. I'm joined by the one and only Courtney Lewis, former director of admissions at Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicine. Courtney, how are you doing?
Good. Back to Seattle where it's nice and gray and not ready for winter yet, I'm realizing.
Does Seattle have a winter?
Yeah, it does. And it lasts a long time.
Oh, no. It lasts a long time. Courtney, you and I just got back from MappedCon in Baltimore. What were your some initial thoughts about MappedCon and the turnout and student participation and all that fun stuff?
It was awesome. Oh my goodness. We had so much fun. It was so great to have that energy of pre-med students again and have workshops and discussions and networking and playing matchmaking between the pre-meds and the deans and directors that we knew that were there tabling and things. So I want to do more already. That's my jam. I love that sphere. And so it was really great. I mean, we had so many people there, and it was right during the playoffs for baseball, which made it even more fun because we were right there and got to peek in at all the baseball games. So even though they lost yesterday, but yeah.
Wah, wah. Did they lose? I didn't see. So the Orioles are out.
They're out.
3 games
Yep,
and
they're out. Spoiler alert for anybody
fault.
who's not keeping up. Rangers are going on, and you know what? I'm okay with that because the Rangers beat Seattle, which is my team, and so if they better win the whole thing if they're going to beat us. So I'm okay with that.
My logic in that is if the Rangers win the whole thing and the Rangers beat Seattle, that means Seattle's the second best team, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how
I
it
want
works.
to lose to the winner and not just somebody who gets completely dominated. So yeah.
That is awesome. All right, friends, if you are joining us, what we do here is we answer your questions. Basically, think of this as free pre-med advising for the hour here on premed.tv, our YouTube channel. If you don't already follow us, you should subscribe to the channel so you get notifications every time we go live. We are typically here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. And then I'm often live on Instagram as well at 11 a.m. Eastern on Fridays. So if you have questions, go over to premed.tv, ask them there, and let's get rocking and rolling if we have questions. Chai says, hello, I was wondering how to explain a low CAR score during an interview if they ask. Also, what to say if they ask what I've been doing to improve myself. I got a 128 in all of the other sections. So, Courtney, I don't know if you've noticed this. The quote-unquote unbalanced MCAT score is a huge fear that students have that oftentimes is unwarranted unless that low CAR score or low whatever other score, section score, is like really low, right? And so maybe we can define what really low is and where that may be an issue, and then potentially answer the question here.
Yeah, so I would run into this from time to time. Usually the CARs, if it's going to be a low score, is going to be that section, so it's not uncommon. Some schools I've noticed do have kind of a bare minimum cutoff of, like a 10 or a 15% in that section. It's not every school. Again, like most things in the application, they want to look at it in the totality of things. Is this a first time take? Is this a repeated thing? Is this an ESL situation? We have a lot of other information that we pull from to try to get a more complete picture when we're just looking at the CAR score. It's not in isolation on an island. But it's not uncommon. Also, I would say if you have made it to an interview, there's already been some vetting that has happened. They wouldn't move you forward to an interview unless they felt at least pretty confident that you'd be able to handle the curriculum, just because they do not have resources to just interview anyone and everyone. And that sounds very cold and calculated, and in some ways it is. But
Mhm.
You're going from a pool of say 6,000 down to a pool of 400 or 500 that they actually have resources to interview. So remember that there's been vetting. Give them context. What happened? Did you study for it maybe in a way that wasn't the best or most conducive? Did you run out of time in that section? What have you done to improve that? Have you done daily reading, as a result of that, just to kind of improve on passage, kind of reading or digestion? So if you've made it to the interview, de-weaponize this question. It's been somewhat vetted already. Just give them context, okay? So just explain what happened and what you've done to grow and improve yourself. And that's kind of another question there. What have you done? Just be honest with what you've worked on. It's really that basic, that clear.
Yeah. I think I love that word de-weaponize. I think as it kind of you were talking about, right? They got the interview.
Yeah.
They vetted you already.
Yeah.
Right? They saw that score and said, good enough. Right?
Yeah. Let's see, let's see what they say. But, on some ground level, yeah, they've already essentially approved it. They just need a little bit more information, right? In terms of growth, wrapping your head around it and, getting some context around it. But that's what I've noticed the most out of kind of the interview process is turning it into something that it's not, or escalating it. You need to de-escalate, you need to de-weaponize these questions. There's a purpose for why they're asking. It's not to make you feel dumb or to bring you in just to say, you really should have tried harder, your application's terrible, right?
How
That's
mean would
not
that
the
be?
point, right? And that's not the point. But are you emotionally mature enough to be able to have any type of critiquing, to be able to answer challenging and complex questions? That's all they're getting at, and you guys should be able to do that. So take a step back from this process and look at it for what it is.
Yeah. And we still have, just to mention, we don't push a lot of services on pre-med office hours. Maybe we should push more. We still have mock interviews, a sale going on if that's something you're interested in. Going through this process, you want Courtney to grill you on, how dare you get a 124 in cars? Why do you think you're even applying to med school? Like,
right.
If you want to practice some of those questions and your answers, go ahead and sign up for some mock interview help with us over at medicalschoolhq.net.
Yep, that's what I'm doing all day, every day right now. And it's one of the areas I feel like tangible improvements over time. If you do mock interviews and you kind of go through the motions of shocking your system almost into being put on the spot for questions and having to pull from different experiences or areas of the brain and give an answer, just going through the motions in the practice just really, really helps in having confidence on the day of. So yeah, if you feel like you need it, it would be a good thing to do.
Yep. All right. Laura asks, I was wondering who and how I should go about writing a thank you letter post-interview. It was a short MMI style, so I don't know if I should reach out to the individuals that did each station. So, Courtney, thank you letters are always a big question that students have. Some admissions committees want them, some don't want them at all. MMI is a little bit different because you're not really connecting with the interviewer in an MMI, at least in a traditional MMI setting. What should students do specifically in the MMI case?
I mean, hopefully admissions would have kind of given you a little bit of guidance on whether they accept them or not, whether that's published information or they give it to you day of. Being a prior director, I wanted things to be funneled through my office so that I could distribute them so people weren't having these sidebar conversations or anything like that. So I would say if they haven't given you feedback one way or the other, I would maybe reach out to them, or I would just send it to admissions and they can distribute it if that's something that they do. But yeah, for MMI, I'm not sure it's super common, and it's probably within a couple of days post interview that you would need to get that in.
Yeah. Yeah. So potentially just to the admissions office. Thank you for a great day versus thank you for that specific interview.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
Mhm.
Davida, I'm a non-trad who grew up as a caregiver for my sibling who had a brain injury before I was born. In 2021, my mom had a stroke, and now I care for her and my sibling as a paid family home caregiver while still working full-time remotely and taking prereqs to transition to med school.
Mhm.
Do I separate these new paid caregiving hours from the quote volunteer hours I did growing up? Do those even matter in the mind of the adcoms? I love this question. I'm sorry, Davida, for
Yeah.
everything that you've been going through, all the family struggles. Hopefully, everyone is doing better.
Mhm.
Yeah, Courtney, this question again comes up all the time in terms of how do I structure my extracurricular hours? If I was in a volunteer position and then I got hired and it's the same position, but now I'm getting paid, is that 2 activities? Do I put it as 1? My favorite answer around this is generally there are no rules.
Right.
What do you typically recommend for students to get across everything they've been doing?
Yeah, I think, when you're applying with the AMCAS application, you only have 15 entries. There's a little bit of juggling sometimes that has to happen. I would see a difference in the paid versus the volunteer, even if it's, now you're taking care of 2 people and it's formal versus the voluntary hours. But if you need to sandwich them together just for the sake of being able to get in a bunch of other very different things, I could understand that. It's really up to you, but I would probably, if you do end up combining them, make sure that there's a separation of what you did unpaid voluntary and what you did as a paid professional, at least in the description. But I don't know. I would probably lean on separating them just so that they know one was kind of in a hired formal capacity versus just a voluntary family thing. But these do count, and they are really valuable experiences in the eyes of AdComs.
Yeah, definitely. So there are no rules. Adam, on an application, is it okay to list shadowing if it is done with a family member? Same last name. Again, this one comes up all the time.
It does.
Courtney, if you were to see that Adam Smith shadowed Dr. Smith and they happen to mention in the description, hey, this is my uncle, this is my dad, this is my whatever, does that lessen the experience?
I think you're going to get different answers on this one, actually.
Yeah.
Adcoms maybe view this one a little bit differently. I would say don't get a letter from this person, but if it's
Yeah.
just in your experience section and you're just listing hours, I'm okay with that. And I think most schools would be okay with that. It's when it comes to a letter, even though most letters that you get are going to be biased, that's why you're asking them. But if it's a family member, a lot of schools will not accept it, or a family member, the med schools won't accept it. So just know you can probably count the hours. They'll probably notice,
Yeah.
but this is not a letter writer.
Yeah.
But
Put
you
it
may
on.
get differing answers.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that key clarification, right? Put it on the application, let the schools do with it what they will, which is almost like any answer. But very specifically, like, don't get a letter from this person.
No.
That letter will clearly be more biased than most letters already are, which is why we're asking letter writers for letters because we know they're going to be biased.
Right?
Hopefully.
That's I saw the kind of duplicity in that, but there is a difference, and in
Yeah,
the eyes of an adcom, there is. So
of course. Zaid, hi MSHQ team. I work as a CNA during my breaks and was wondering if med schools have any preference whether to do clinical hours in a nursing home or hospital setting as a CNA. No. Interact with the patients.
yep.
Reflect.
If
Get some good experiences.
if you've had a lot of time in a hospital and it would be beneficial to do a nursing home just for a change of setting to see a different side of medicine, cool. If not, do what works for you. They're both going to count. And CNA is another really valuable experience in the eyes of an AdCom. I know a lot of faculty really appreciate, because it's not the most glamorous of roles that you're doing. A lot of the time you're kind of doing the dirty work, and you're interacting a lot with patients and kind of being an integral member of the team. So valuable, but setting, it's up to you.
Yeah. Good. Andrew, how do medical schools tend to feel about students who want to defer enrollment for a year if they're accepted? Is it brought up before acceptance? And is it hard to convince schools to let you do it? So I'll speak on this one a little bit, because I deferred a year post acceptance. And ultimately what happened was I was accepted to New York Medical College, and I decided that the job that I was doing was giving me valuable experience, being a leader, being a boss, making money, all that kind of fun stuff. And so I reached out to the school and said, hey, like, can I defer a year? And so we had a conversation. Why do you want to defer? What's going on? I think they were trying to hash out, like, are you not sure about us? Are you trying to find something better? Are you going to reapply and hopefully get in somewhere else? And I think once they were happy with my answer, I'm like, no, like, I'm coming to you. You were the only ones that accepted me. I'm getting this experience that I think is going to be helpful for me. They're like, sure, go for it. The problem, I think, Andrew, for you, or not problem, but it's going to be as almost every answer is, it's going to be dependent on the medical school. Some med schools allow deferments on a case-by-case basis. Some don't. Right? It's just, you're accepted or you're not, and they don't want to deal with worrying about deferment lists and filling those seats for a year and then not having seats for the next year because there are deferments there. And so it's always going to be post acceptance. You're never going to bring it up like, hey, just in case you were wondering, if you accept me, I'm going to ask for a deferral. Like, you don't want to play that game. Just wait for that acceptance, and then for whatever reason you want to defer, be authentic and say, hey, do you request, do you accept deferments? Here's what I'm thinking. And they'll either say yes or no. Courtney, do you ever think a school will go, oh, that person asked for a deferment, I'm going to withdraw their acceptance?
Yeah.
You think so?
Yeah.
Who do you know so?
I know so, yes.
Okay. So
be careful with it. Make sure that there is a purpose for it. There can be lots of reasons, I would say, but sometimes you'll have to sign an affidavit. Sometimes it could put your acceptance in jeopardy. Usually it requires a dean sign off, so you have to have everybody on board.
And when you say requires an affidavit, you're basically signing a contract that says, I'm deferring and I'm not going to officially apply again. I'm coming to you.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Because we're hoping
it's more binding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's nuance for sure.
Yeah. All right. Good luck, Andrew. David, hey, Mapped team. As I start analyzing schools, I was wondering how you'd recommend students better utilize the MSAR Choose DO Explorer to help craft school lists. I like that they mentioned the Choose DO Explorer. I think a lot of students don't understand there is a DO tool similar to the MD tool that the AAMC puts out. Mm-hmm. Courtney, crafting school lists.
That's a toughie. I know a lot of missions kind of read the same, and so it's hard for people to kind of figure that out. But I think if you look at outcomes of schools, or what they say kind of their core niche or purpose is, and see if that aligns with what your goals are as a doctor. I think schools in the Inland Empire are super clear that they want to put physicians in the Inland Empire. And if that's not really where you want to be, then maybe that school is not a good match for you. I would say look at in-state, out-of-state matriculation numbers just as a way to inform if you don't have a strong tie to that school, are they fairly open to matriculating out-of-state students that are a good fit? I would say fit is a hard word to kind of narrow down, but it's probably going to be aligning with the goals and initiatives of the school. Do you fit the way that their curriculum is laid out, right? Are you somebody who learns from lecture? Okay. If not, and lecture is mandatory, maybe that's not the best fit for curriculum for you, right? And so looking at these types of things and aligning yourself with the purpose and clubs and organizations that you can be part of, or populations that you can work with and things like that, and helping them see why the two of you will kind of thrive together because of what's offered and what's available and how you operate, I think it's kind of the best way to go about it and fit the school. So it's going to take some digging. Look at how things are laid out. Do you want to be in certain areas for your third and fourth year? Do you have the latitude to do that, or are things kind of set, or do you have to plan them all on your own? All kinds of stuff like this. So if you really want to get into the weeds, go and look at student handbooks, because essentially that's what you're signing up for whenever you enroll in a school. And that'll give you a lot of information. But using MSAR and ChooseDO, I would say looking at kind of the mission and the outcomes, looking at the first year class makeup, which would be the class that just matriculated, will give you some insight. And then kind of what resources are available. What's the climate of this school? Is it the only program that they have, or are faculty spread across a number of different things? Does that work for you? Are you able to participate in clubs during your first and second year or not? Is research really important to you? Are you going for a hyper-competitive residency where you're going to need quite a bit? Things like that. So yeah, that's how I would use it.
Premedyears.com/437 is a podcast interview that I did, or a podcast episode that I did, all about building a school list. So you can go check that out as well. Raina, dealing with a rude interviewer.
What happens?
Question mark. Yeah. So Courtney, it's funny, where you and I met in Toronto at the conference in Toronto. I was having a conversation with another dean of admissions there, and she was talking about how there were so many complaints that come in post interview day about a rude interviewer, about just bias or negativity, and oftentimes the dean is like, they'll go look at the notes from the interviewer, the feedback from the interviewer, and the interviewer loved the student. And it's just like huge misinterpretation of what happened. Or potentially maybe a role that the interviewer was trying to play,
right?
To throw a student off their game. Let's assume there's definitely a rude interviewer here, right? And it's not just a misperception. What ramifications are there? What steps can a student take to report an interviewer, or what?
I would say try your best to self-regulate. The only person you can kind of control emotionally is yourself. And so try your best to move through it, because you don't necessarily know what's going on in their mind. And I would agree with that other kind of dean of admissions. So often people would kind of freak out and think, oh my gosh, it went so horribly wrong, but they were so mean and they were so rude. And that just doesn't line up with the notes. And yes, stress is a part of the interview. So again, take a step back from this and say, there is a purpose in seeing if I have aptitude to handle stressful conversations or stressful situations or things with complexity. Try not to temperature read the entire time. Somebody may sit there like this the whole time. That doesn't mean that it's going really poorly. You have to just not fight this process and accept it, and try to be enthusiastic and make eye contact and work through this just like you would a patient encounter, right? If somebody's not giving you anything and they're really abrasive and nasty, how are you going to act? Because if you can't handle that, it's going to be really difficult for you going into third and fourth year. So they're looking for the aptitudes, right? So moderate yourself, kind of try as best you can to move through that, even if it's not coming across as very kind. I know somebody that I was working with this cycle, where an interviewer took a phone call while they were doing the interview. that person ended up getting an offer in the end. So maybe it was just that this person was like, I already know what I'm going to say. They're easy, right? So I'm
Or
going
it
to
was
take
a
this.
super urgent call, right?
Well, it was a physician, right? And they were on call. So, but it really put the candidate off, and they were, they wanted to chat about it because they didn't know what it meant. And, until you get that answer, you won't. But I kind of figured it was probably because they already knew what they were going to do, and they were probably on call. So sometimes this just happens. So do your best. You're the only person you can control. Try to make the most of it. Try to make the best of it. Try to not get so wound up by it that you kind of derail the situation. Just adapt to whatever's going on. Try to do your best, and that will give them evidence that you are able to handle these types of environments, even if it's not ideal. And that's kind of the best case scenario.
Yeah. Good. SBug27. I was wondering how to ask for financial aid for programs I've been accepted to. I want to make sure I remain respectful and professional with these conversations. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Courtney, I think they answered their own question with their question, right? Remain respectful and professional.
Yep. It's fine. I mean, financial aid is usually an entire department devoted to making sure you are aware of all of the opportunities that are available to you to finance your medical education, that you stay within that realm. So I know plenty of financial aid directors that want these types of questions that will help you navigate it. Obviously, don't bombard them. I know some people are really excessive in their communication. Do the research that you can, right? Come to them with having done at least the groundwork and with some actual questions and seeking guidance, and then they'll be able to point you in the right direction. So these are not uncommon conversations to have. Be professional, do your homework before going on the call, and then, what they suggest, make sure you kind of go and dig into that. And if it needs additional follow-up, you can do that. But so oftentimes they want to be spoon-fed this information, and they haven't done any research on their own. That's not really being professional. So do what you can with what's available, and then go with questions.
Yeah.
Not uncommon, though. It's okay.
Yep. Love it. Jesus, good afternoon. How important is score distribution? I got a 504, 125, 128, 123, 128. I'm okay with my overall score. I'm worried about the 123. So we already talked about this a little bit already. Some schools won't like it. Some schools will be fine with it. It all depends on the school. The MSAR, I believe, has started to put some of this information on there. I know there's one school on there that'll say, hey, a subsection score less than 124 is non-competitive, which means don't apply to us. Yeah.
Usually it's around a 124 or 125, because that puts you right around that 50 percentile, or at least a 35, 40%, depending on the score.
Yep.
But I would also look at, was this your major? Because then it would be maybe concerning, right? If you majored in this and had quite a bit of coursework in this area, but if you only had one or two classes, or you kind of took the bare minimum, I would see how maybe that would have happened. Or maybe it was just coursework that you hadn't really covered in a lot of detail. But again, there's data points you can kind of look at.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, it's going to vary by school. I've had students on the podcast that have gotten 121s in subsections and gotten into med schools. So it's just all going to depend. My answer always is a higher MCAT score always helps. A higher subsection score always helps.
Yep.
So. Paola, I held a club board position from 2016 to 2020, then continued as a member 2021, 2022, and now hold a club, have a club position now. Do I just say I had a club position all throughout despite the gap? The gap between 2020 and 2021? Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Sure. No worries. Easy peasy. Supercube. Oh, I met, I don't know, Courtney, if you remember Fluffy Cookie, who was a very common
Yeah.
contributor.
Yeah.
She was
Yeah.
at the conference. She's like, I'm Fluffy
Oh,
Cookie. So funny.
that's so
Uh,
funny.
yeah, she's like, she's the one that has the ravens and the
Yep.
cowboys on one avatar.
Yeah.
Supercube says, would it be possible to major in math and minor in chemistry to fulfill requirements? You can do whatever you want
Sure.
as long as you take the classes. Just one asterisk on that. A minor doesn't do anything, right? It's
Yeah.
not like a med school is going to go, oh my gosh, look, they have a minor. That's amazing. A minor is just a piece of paper the school says that you took some extra classes and you qualified for a minor. There's nothing beneficial about a minor in of itself.
Yep.
Bruce, hey team, how much weight would you give to a school's clinical partners for residency and clerkship when prioritizing schools, or generally is the experience the same for most schools? So it's interesting. I think there's two separate questions here, right? How much weight would you give the clinical partners for residency? So let's say, hey, I'm going to apply to Harvard. Their clinical partners are Mass General, Brigham and Women's, Beth Israel, maybe. I forget. Right, super prestigious, huge academic medical centers where the sickest of the sick go. So that's one potential question. I think the second part of this question is a completely separate question. Is the experience the same for most schools in terms of potential exposure, maybe patient populations, et cetera? What would you think for the first question and then the second question?
First question, I can see it being a pro just in understanding that system, having some familiarity with it, having some face time there. It's not going to be a bad thing. Is it going to be enough to get you over some of the other hurdles? No, not in and of itself, but some familiarity is never a bad thing. And then for the second question, I would say it varies very greatly, school to school.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part. And you kind of mentioned earlier in terms of building a school list, understanding, right? There are some med schools, typically DO schools, although I wouldn't say there are no MD schools. I just don't know any off the top of my head, where a lot of that third and fourth year is up to the student to kind of arrange and organize. And I think that is one of the bigger differences between MD and DO schools is that most MD schools, if not all, are tied to large academic medical centers, and most DO schools are not. They're more in the community, maybe tied to smaller community hospitals. You may have to go further and or farther and wider for those rotations, third and fourth year. So it's definitely something where there can be some major differences between schools for that.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, yeah, it's not a blanket rule for sure. Some of the benefits of going far and wide or to ones that aren't specifically teaching hospitals is you're not fighting anybody else for the preceptor's time during your clerkship. So you're not behind a resident, behind an upperclassman, and, you know, behind everybody else, you know, fourth in line for getting to view anything that's going on like you would be at a teaching hospital. Or maybe a preceptor has residents and they have 3 medical schools that they work with, and so you're all kind of in a group setting, and so you don't get a lot of FaceTime or one-on-one. Whereas some of these new affiliations or ones in areas that are more like remote, you end up getting a lot of FaceTime just with the preceptor who's a physician. And so there are perks to it for sure. You know, I would say state schools tend to kind of have a very strict and tight hold on all of the affiliations and where you can be, which is why you see people branching out a little bit more, just because, you know, they won't let anybody encroach on their territory, and there's still a need to rotate students through there. So I would say if you need a lot of structure and you want kind of set rotations, at least for your core ones, you're going to want to go to a school where they have set rotations and will help you facilitate, and then you can kind of choose your elective ones. Because that's where you're going to want, if you're trying to specialize, that's where you're going to want to fill them with specialty ones, so that going into fourth year, you can get what are called audition rotations.
Yeah.
So this is an area I feel like pre-meds don't give enough attention to that greatly affects the outcome of their medical education. I feel like we should talk about it more, because this, I would say, really can change things third and fourth year.
Yeah.
And it's not
good question, Bruce.
Yeah.
Zaid, can you mention religious beliefs in an interview or application if they're an imperative part of why you want to become a physician, or any other important questions? Yeah. So, Courtney, one of our big missions is being authentic, and telling your story, and sometimes that includes religion.
Religion is a protected status that they cannot use in determining your acceptance or not. So you should feel free to share that side of you. Now, if you're going to hold every single patient to your own religious beliefs and not let them have any type of body autonomy or choice making, that's when it becomes maybe a little bit problematic. Or if you have extremist type views that will kind of encroach on the care that you may provide to patients. But you can have your own, absolutely, religious beliefs, and you can bring those up and it'll be protected.
Yeah, definitely. Good question. Aimbot, do you guys offer med school application editing? We do. medicalschoolhq.net/advising is where you want to go to check that out. Courtney, that's a large part of your job with Medical School HQ, is working with students one-on-one, also working with students in a group setting through our Application Academy program as well, doing mock interviews, doing essay editing, doing just general pre-med advising. Yeah. Yep. So, yeah, that's what we do. That's what supports us to come on here and hang out with you guys for the hour and offer all this advice.
Yep.
Peyton, in terms of making a medical school application list, how do you recommend about looking into residency match data? So I'll talk about this one for a little bit. I have historically said you don't look at match data to determine your school list. Now, there's someone on TikTok who I had on the Premed Years podcast recently, Dr. Pendergrast, Trisha, I think is her name, Trisha Pendergrast. And she didn't change my mind, but she changed how I discuss this. So there are two ways to potentially look at a school list. One way, I still say don't do it. The other way, I say, okay, great, I understand why that would be important. The first way that I say don't do it is looking at specific specialties. So if you're like me, right? I went into med school. I want to be an orthopedic surgeon. That's all I'm going to med school for, blah, 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 right? If I were to pick med schools based on their orthopedic surgery match list, I think that's not the best idea. Number one, most students change their mind anyway. So what happens if you change your mind and you decide to pick a specialty that when you go and look at those match lists, it's like, uh-oh, this school is not so great for that. And this is the one I chose because of this other specialty that I was interested in. The other problem is that the match lists don't make the school. The students at the school make the match list. And so it's each individual student as they're going through the process, as they're meeting mentors, as they're meeting the attendings, as they're learning what they are potentially interested in, they decide what specialties they want to apply to. So to me, it's not really the school doing that, it's the student. So if you're looking at specialties, I would say don't do that match list wise. Where Trisha and I had this conversation was really big picture, looking at overall match rates. And her big argument, which I obviously agree with, is med school is kind of useless if you don't match into a residency so that you can practice medicine, right? In this country, going to medical school doesn't let you do anything. It's residency that ultimately lets you practice as a physician at the end of the day. And so you have to match to practice medicine, or else med school is useless. And I still have a little bit of a hang up with this because most med schools have really good match lists, right? They match their students. or else they would lose their accreditation, right? If med schools had issues. And yes, every once in a while you'll see potentially a really bad match from one school or another, and you're like, uh-oh, what happened here? But that is the far extreme of normal. Most schools are 95+% match, and you have to take their match list with a grain of salt, because they and Courtney, you can correct me. I don't think the DO world requires a match list to be publicized, do they? Or do they not? Do you know?
I don't know if it's required, but you can find that
Yeah.
information readily for all the schools.
A lot of schools put it out. Whether or not it's required, and more importantly, how they report the data can be a little fishy sometimes. And so you have to kind of look at the data, because some schools will say, hey, 100% match list or 100% match rate. And you look at the match rate and you go, wait a minute, like 3 people matched into research years. That's not matching, right? Yeah, they have something to do this year, but they didn't match. Maybe they chose not to apply for the match, but then there are questions on why. So you have to understand how to look at these lists as well. So match lists can be important to look at. For all intents and purposes, most medical schools will prepare you to match and you'll be fine.
I have very strong views on this topic, but it would take a lot of time to dig into the weeds of that. So maybe another time, because I think that there is a lot that goes into this, that if pre-meds actually knew what to look for and how to look for it, it would be beneficial. This is one of the kind of soapboxy topics that I have, where I feel like it should matter and you should be looking at these types of things, but there's a way to do it. So maybe another time. Maybe
a separate podcast on the pre-med years.
Yeah. Okay. There's a lot.
Love it. Good question, Peyton. David asks, when do interviews usually start to roll out? I completed both DO and MD applications by the end of July, and I haven't heard anything other than some rejections. Reddit has been worrying me a little. Yeah. Courtney, this is the most stressful time, I think, for students, when everything that's in their control has been taken care of,
right? And
now everything is out of their control.
Right. It's a hurry up and wait situation.
Except for going and checking Reddit. Like, stay off of Reddit.
Yeah. It is what it is. At this point, just continue on with your life and, continue doing things that will help build your foundation. So if you do get that call up, you're ready to go. Don't wait until you get that invite to do prepping for interviews, because sometimes it's like, hey, we had a cancellation and we have one in 3 days. And if you're like, well, I've done nothing to actually prep for this, that's going to be a problem. So you can be doing things in the meantime that will help you be ready to go at any point. Now, we're still kind of in the early acceptance, kind of rolling out a first interview. So it's not extreme kind of, oh no, phase just yet, okay? So you won't be able to control this part of it. Sometimes it's moving pool to pool. Sometimes it's just the school and their process. Just try your best to just keep on trucking every day and doing things that'll be helpful in case you do get that call up, because you still have some time though.
All right. Taylor asks, my cumulative GPAs go 355 to 365 to 376, then a 329 senior year. So cumulative 355, science 349, flat overall trend. If I apply MD and DO, can I get away with not doing a post-bac, assuming the rest of my application is A+? So 355, I'm assuming freshman year, 365 sophomore year, 376 junior year, and then a pretty precipitous drop. So I'm not sure why they say flat overall trend, because
maybe just for their science.
They're going up. They're going up. Maybe 349 science trend, and then a pretty steep down drop there. Is that going to give concern to some schools?
Sure. It's your most recent coursework, right? And you're kind of like, oof, what happened there when you got to the upper division of this kind of core foundational coursework? But a 3.29 can be straight Bs. It could be one C and a couple A's and maybe one or two B pluses. So it really needs to be looked at on what are the
course
grades and what is the content of that senior year. And maybe this person was also working during this time and doing research and studying for the MCAT. And, you know, these are actually made up of mostly B's and A's. It's just more B's than A's. Then it's not particularly problematic, but you'd have to see what it is that makes this up. But it could be a risk factor for sure.
Yep. Good question. Taylor, that's a good question to potentially ask as part of Mapped Pro. The Mapped platform is mostly free at tracking your grades and courses and activities and all of that fun stuff, building a school list. If you want to ask our advisors specific questions, you can do so within Mapped Pro, right inside of the platform. Right now, can you send a letter of interest pre-interview? So I have a pretty strong stance on this. A letter of interest pre-interview is your application. I don't think you need to bug a school any more than that, right? You applied to that school, you theoretically submitted secondaries, you sent 2 letters of interest, right? Courtney, is there any utility of going, hey, by the way, I'm still interested? Like,
not at this point,
what do you on your end? You're like, well, duh, right?
Yeah, nope. There's no point, I would say.
Yeah. Don't bug them. One of those, don't call us, we'll call you.
Right.
Yeah. Jesus, thank you. I'm a nutritional science major. One more question, if that's okay. Does phlebotomy count for clinical experience? Yes. Sure does.
Yep. Pretty straightforward. I think we're caught up.
All right. Any more questions, friends? If not, just a reminder, if you're looking for some one-on-one help, go to medicalschoolhq.net/advising. Our mock interviews are still on sale. It's mock interview season. Courtney, you mentioned that's kind of what you're doing day in and day out right now. In a month or so, we'll transition into next application cycle and working with students with their essays and applications for next cycle. But if you're in this current cycle, you want to jump on some mock interviews, whether you have an interview scheduled or not yet, get your mock interviews in, because the skills that you learn doing a mock interview don't go away. And so you don't need to wait for an interview invite to come to start doing mock interviews, which I think is a common thought.
Yeah. And I think it was David who asked about kind of the timeline thing. One other thing that you may be able to kind of look at, either in the MSAR or ChooseDO, almost lost my headphone there, is to check the length of their application season. You know, some people are done by November. And if your school is, you know, one of the places you applied, November is their last date, then you'll kind of know this is getting towards the end of their interview season, but you still have a number of weeks in which to do that. So maybe look to those kind of timelines to see if it goes until April, May, June, whatever, you still have quite a few months to go in this process. If they don't and they're done relatively quickly, then you can kind of track that type of communication and know kind of where you're falling.
Yeah. Nicholas, thoughts on attending new schools under pre-accreditation? So let's just work on our language here. Schools cannot accept you if they are under pre-accreditation. They are preliminarily accredited before they get their full accreditation. This question comes up all the time. We have a lot of schools opening up recently, which is relatively new. There was a lull for a while, and then within the last 10 or 5 years, there's been a lot more schools opening. So this question has been coming up more and more and more. I have yet to see any school that goes through preliminary accreditation process not get full accreditation. There's one school right now that is struggling to get their full accreditation.
Right.
I'm assuming they're going to get it. All right. There's so much work that goes into opening a school that it's almost a given. Just the process of getting full accreditation requires a class to graduate. So, yeah, shouldn't be a problem. The biggest issue is funding, because financial aid typically isn't available if the school is not fully accredited.
Yeah, in a lot of cases that is the situation. I went through the entire accreditation process, and I can tell you I would almost prefer a school to go through the entire accrediting process for the 4 years than just open up a branch campus that receives accreditation through that and doesn't have to go through the process. But I mean, they are digging into our files, our standard operating procedures every single year, right? We have meeting after meeting after meeting, and anything that needs to be fixed gets flagged. You can look at those flags, it's public information, and what they're doing to address it, and they move step by step. And so you have people, I would love to be on an accrediting body one day. That's like my goal. I'm going to be it. But I would say there's a lot of safety in that, is because as you go through school, any pivots that need to happen or things that need to grow or be changed are addressed then and there before the next accrediting visit. So you can have a lot of security in knowing that people are watching over what's happening, how you're receiving your education, how the class is going, what the outcomes look like they're going to be, and things like that. So, obviously do your research and things. If you're somebody who needs a ton of structure and a little bit of movement, or you don't want to have to start new charters or chapters of clubs and organizations, then maybe it's not the school for you. But I know that my students greatly benefited from being at a newer school where they were able to take on leadership positions and open these new chapters and get involved, because, a lot of the times there's bureaucracy where, in an established school for the past 100 years, this is the way they've done it. And you can't even try to go for a leadership position until you're in 3rd and 4th year, right? Whereas in a new school, you have that latitude. So there's pros and cons for sure, but if they're going through it, there's going to be a lot of checks. So you should have a lot of safety in that. And a lot of times they have to have private trust set up. So if for some reason they don't, which would be kind of a first of its kind, they would have to pay you back all of the money and get you a seat at another school. So they try to set up a really good safety net for you. It's not happened yet, but they do have to graduate their first class before they can even get it.
That's the game. Last question here. Kaden, how do you recommend I go about getting letters of recommendations? You ask. Hey, professor. Hey, doctor. I need a letter of recommendation. Courtney, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I would say do some groundwork before you ask, right? There's a bit of strategy maybe that goes into this. Like, if you're wanting to get a letter, you're going to need 2 science professor letters, make sure you're going to class. Make sure maybe you ask questions or you sit towards the front. Maybe you go to office hours, or, kind of take advantage of any of the resources that are available so that this person, or else I'm not going to write you a letter. Probably good to know that information before you're asking for a letter or have already completed their class. So you can do that. Maybe you can take multiple classes with the same science professor. If the way that they teach is really conducive to how you learn, take multiple classes, even if it's not the most convenient time. Maybe it's an hour later than what you wanted. In the long run, it'll probably be beneficial. You're going to do well. You're going to understand the information because you line up with how the professor teaches, and you will have more face time with them in which to get a stronger letter of recommendation, hopefully. So there's definitely ways to go about this, but it takes some forethought, I would say, to get the strongest outcome.
Definitely. Great questions today. Just a reminder, we are here almost every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern, premed.tv. Go check it out. If you are looking for some one-on-one advising, you want some help with your applications to put together your best application for medical school, go to medicalschoolhq.net/advising. We'll help with your personal statement, your activity descriptions, secondary essays, interview prep. If you unfortunately have an institutional action or some sort of misdemeanor arrest or something like that, we can help you with all of those essays. Whatever you need help with in your applications or through your pre-med journey, that's what we are here for. Courtney, thanks for hanging out today.
Yeah, always fun. Always enjoy it. I love kind of the randomness of the questions, but I like sharing the strategy, right? It's always good to get it on this end instead of saying like, you could have gotten it, but you just didn't quite get there on the application cycle. So better to ask now and do it right.
Good luck.